All right, again, this is Elizabeth Roaring with Sea Grant in OAR, and we will get started in just a couple minutes. All right, our clock says 2:59, and that's close enough because I know a lot of you people have been on the phone since 2:30, so thank you again for your patience. This is Elizabeth Roaring. I am with Sea Grant at NOAA Research. In the room, I am here with
Nancy Beller-Sims, Climate Program Office. And Gina Esco, Office of Weather and Air Quality.
And we represent part of the OAR Social Science Network. We're just a group of social scientists who get together, talk about what kind of research we're funding or doing here at NOAA, and we want to share it with those out in the field. So today we are going to be talking about communicating weather probability and risks. We have three great speakers. Dr. Kim Clocko-McLean, which, Kim, I'm so not used to that extra last name, but awesome. Dr. Cody Berry, and also Jill Gamble. So those are going to be our three speakers. We're going to start with Kim and Cody. Kim and Cody, I'm wondering if you could just take a minute to say a couple words about your background and then get started.
Sure thing. Thank you, Elizabeth, and we're so excited to get to talk with everybody on the phone today. So I'll give a quick introduction to myself. I'm a research scientist here at the Cooperative Institute for Mesoscale Meteorological Studies, or SIMS, and I also serve the role of the Societal Applications Coordinator for that group. So I sort of help to shepherd the research that's going on in the social sciences within the Cooperative Institute, but also you'll see a lab affiliation, the National Severe Storms Lab. I'm the group team lead for our group of two. It includes me and Cody. And I'll have Cody introduce herself in a second. You'll see both Cody and I wear multiple hats out here. I was until recently, until about a year ago, I was out there in Silver Spring with the rest of the OIR social science group working for the Office of Weather and Air Quality, and came here to help organize this body of research and just to rejoin the research community. So with that, Cody, I'll offer it to you for your introduction.
Hey, I'm Cody Berry. I'm also a SIMS research scientist at the University of Oklahoma. Half of my job is I am a Sea Grant liaison to the National Severe Storms Laboratory, and then the other half of my job is that I am the executive officer of NOAA's Hazardous Weather Testbed, which if people are unfamiliar, I kind of liken it to like a clinical drug trial where you try things out before you release it on the public. And so we do that in regards to weather data and different tools and technologies. And I just oversee all of the different projects that take place within the Hazardous Weather Testbed.
Awesome. I love that. I love that comparison. We're going to talk about some of our clinical drug trials today, too. So to get into the talk, the presentation title here is FACETS Social Science. For those who aren't familiar with the FACETS program, it stands for Forecasting a Continuum of Environmental Threats. It's one of the big research programs going on, spearheaded at the Severe Storms Lab but also now starting to cross into other domains, other labs, other groups across the weather infrastructure are really interested in the paradigm I'm going to be talking to you about today, and are on board. And actually, Gina Esco, there at OWAC, is part of the working group, the FACETS working group that's organizing those connections. So we're really glad to have her representation for the social sciences in that. So to jump into FACETS, what it really means, we see it as a communication paradigm that has 4 different dimensions, and I'll talk a bit about each one of these in turn. The first part, the big part that most people recognize about FACETS is it's really about communicating probabilistic information. It's about communicating uncertainty and transitioning the Weather Service from just offering deterministic products, so watches and warnings and convective outlooks, and trying to give information that fills in the gaps and offers some of the shades of gray to what we think, and helps people to understand the forecaster's confidence and just a full representation of what it is that we know about hazards as they're unfolding. The second part of this is that we are trying to connect with the HAZSIMP program. Several of you on the phone, I'm sure, are familiar with this program, but it's about the watch, warning, and advisory system that's used by the Weather Service. This is their marquee set of communication products. And as we do this transition from sort of determinism to probabilism, we're working with the Weather Service to think about, well, what could this mean for how watches and warnings and advisories are done? Is this something that can relate in some way and help revitalize the system? The third part is the system is really, in the long run, the hope is that we will be able to communicate not just the probabilities of incurring a particular hazard, but also to improve the way that we communicate the impacts of those hazards, which for the, all of you social scientists on the line, you know that the impacts are much more complex, multifaceted, variegated, and population focused. And so we're really trying to infuse those perspectives into the program here. And the fourth part of this communication paradigm is to provide more continually updated information. So right now, you might get a watch that's issued several hours before storms form, and the next thing you'll get will be a warning maybe 13 minutes before a storm hits. The goal is to try to provide gap-filling information that evolves continuously as the atmosphere evolves as well. So it's, again, this is something that kind of breaks down the watch, warning, advisory system and tries to offer a little bit more than we do today. So the first part of the paradigm really kind of looks like this. It's transitioning from probabilism to determinism, or from determinism to probabilism. This is what that could look like. It could, on the left, you see a traditional Weather Service tornado warning, just the big red box, the polygon. On the right side, you could see what this looks like in the future, where we offer actual estimates of the probability of incurring a hazard sometime in the future. And this would also allow us to extend the lead time. The average lead time of a tornado warning is something like 13 minutes. We're thinking if we offer probabilities for a space far downstream of a storm, that could increase the effective amount of information people are getting to perhaps an hour of time or more. And we're notably, this paradigm is already in effect in some parts of the Weather Service in different hazard suites. The Hurricane Center, for example, has been developing products for communicating uncertainty for some time. And we see this as part of the FACETS paradigm. This is a cone of uncertainty that I'm sure many are familiar with, their marquee communication product. But they also have put through recently several new products to communicate different facets of hazards with uncertainty information. So this is the storm surge product that you're looking at right now. This is the probability of exceeding a certain threshold of storm surge. And then they also have products for tropical storm force winds and earliest time of arrival. Each of these was created with social scientific input that said, you know what, there's a little bit more about this situation that the cone isn't telling that people need to know about. And so the Hurricane Center put together more things, and this is kind of what we're aiming to do in the severe space and other spaces. So the second part, revitalizing the watch, warning, advisory system and tying to HAZSIMP, I want to just tie with, there's sort of this conceptual model that's been employed overseas to think about different ways of communicating threats and impacts. I just want to highlight that they also are very interested in communicating uncertainty, and that's a big part of the way that they do their communication. So on this scale, you can see there's sort of an impact scale on the bottom and a probability scale along the y-axis. And, you know, so just this is kind of the direction that we're thinking we could go with something like this, is to just to reveal some of the potential array of uncertainty in the system. It's also about communicating impacts. So if you think about the plume that I showed you earlier, probabilities, imagine a future where these probabilities don't just represent the probability of a hazard exceeding some severity criterion, but that there's a population that's at risk and they have certain characteristics, and those probabilities reflect the probabilities of that impact to that population. And finally, this is kind of an example of what the continuity of flow of information can look like. This is what the plumes of probabilities can look like in practice. And the assumption here is if we look at the forecaster as a human that plays an important role in all of this, we want to give a little bit of, we want to export a little bit of the effort to automation and allow the forecasters to give some more nuanced threat information that decision makers really need. And also offer this information that fills in some of the gaps where there currently isn't any information offered. So what do our projects look like? This is where we're going to show you a little bit of what Cody was talking about, especially with the test bed, where we bring in different groups of people and try to actually have them use these products, some of the prototype products, and give us feedback on what it is that they need and how they work for them. So big highlight here is our hazardous weather test bed. One of the things that we do is for a couple of weeks in the spring, in May and early June, we bring in weather service forecasters and broadcast meteorologists and emergency managers and create what's called an integrated warning team. And we focus on severe hazards here, specifically tornado, severe hazards, and lightning. And we have these folks, the forecasters issue the products and create the probability plumes, and then the end users, the broadcasters, and the emergency managers receive those forecasts and make decisions based on them. And then we have a bevy of researchers who come from around the country to observe this whole system as it works through different cases and to observe how that works for each of those constituent elements of the system. So why emergency managers? Well, we're interested in emergency managers because they already have very complex decision thresholds, and no emergency manager is alike. There are different scales at which they operate. They operate at city to state to county levels. They also have different kinds of jurisdictional authorities and just different thoughts about how they interact with the Weather Service Watch Warning Advisory System. This is just one example from one state of the counties and the different kinds of siren policies that emergency managers can have. And we know that emergency managers are a vital part of the safety infrastructure. Knowing how they communicate and how they would communicate in a world with probabilistic information is very, very important. We want to make sure that they are able to tailor their protocols to their communities as they see need to. And the ways that they tend to communicate, the means through which they have to communicate include things like sirens, radios, cable intercepts, television. We are very interested in how they would use the probabilistic information in conjunction with all of these means of communicating. If we put out a tool that our end users can't use or don't understand, then we have not done anything to help the American public upon which these public safety officials are really trying to act and help. So in the test bed, the way that we've set up the emergency management room, we have a data display for the probabilistic information. They're also able to use some of the systems that they use at home, things like GR2 Analyst, NWS Chat, and we give them assignments for locations and the kinds of activities that are going on to make it a little bit more representative of typical, emergency management activities. And then we have them disseminate messages. So as they would, if they were at home, what would you do with your sirens? And who would you call? And develop written briefs and social media posts. Show us what those things look like and where you're having issues or where you're having success. In general, we found that the emergency managers in the test bed wanted to communicate through 6 main mediums, things like sirens, social media posts. they really do a lot of internal communication with partner agencies and groups. So to them, it's just as important to know what they can peel out of our systems and pass along to these other people as it is for them to use the information to make a decision to sound something like a siren. They also want to be able to pass the information along in ways that are logical and that can be understood easily. And their response decisions, we found, are very nuanced, and they depend on a lot of factors. So they're very dependent on things like local activities. If there's something like what you see here, an event that's going on, this is the Indiana State Fair, then their threshold of concern can get much lower. They might be concerned at much lower probabilities for much lower hazard severity thresholds and take action much sooner for things like that. They also are influenced by their jurisdiction, the scale of the jurisdiction, and the assets that are available to them, their jurisdictional authorities. What the community has available in communication assets is also very influential on the kinds of decisions they'll make. They're thinking about, how do the messages translate over each of these mediums? Am I in a rural area where I only can reach people through radio? Then I have to simplify this a lot, is something that we hear from them over and over again. And of course, they're very interested in the populations at risk. They know about the communities, and they want to do what's necessary to reach each of them in ways that are relevant. So we found with the probabilistic information, there were some things that were a struggle. They did ultimately adjust to having fee, and they really wanted to have the probabilistic hazard information when they left every week. They wanted it tomorrow, but they still also wanted to have warnings. They really want that deterministic benchmark as just something that can help them pull a trigger. And because second bullet, they're really concerned about working in concert with other aspects of the warning system. They want to be in lockstep with broadcast meteorologists. They want to be in lockstep with other public safety officials. And they think that they need these trigger points to keep everybody in line so that not everybody is out there making their own independent decisions. They also noted that they very seldomly have defined probabilistic thresholds and that they can be fluid. It can really depend on the situation. So this would create a need for all new procedures for many of them. They also noted that they didn't just get the information from the probabilistic information itself, but they still sought that human contact. It was really important for them to get information from forecaster discussion boxes that we implemented with each of the plumes. You could click on it and the forecasters would talk about the storm as it was evolving, and they really loved that. They love weather service chat, and they do their own radar analysis to make sure that what they're seeing on the probabilistic information makes sense to them. But when confusion did arise, especially if there was a discord between the way the warnings worked and the probabilistic information, they largely would go with what they knew. They would turn off the probabilistic information and just go with the deterministic warnings. With regard to update frequencies, the system itself actually provides updates every 2 minutes, which can be quite a lot. Emergency managers love that, but they also noted that they, in the real world, wouldn't be looking at this, just sitting at a computer looking at it continually. So they needed a lot of cues to help them understand how the probabilities are changing. They don't just need to know that it's 90% now. They need to know, well, has it been growing? Is it decreasing? What do you think it's going to be in the future? And so we've made a number of time trend tools to help them with that.
Okay, so why broadcast meteorologists? Colleagues at the Center for Risk and Crisis Management at the University of Oklahoma did a nationwide survey last year and found that despite the growing numbers of smartphones and apps, that a majority of Americans are still learning about tornado warnings from their local broadcast meteorologists. So that is one reason why we really want to include them in these types of projects. So we've created a fictitious television station, which we call KVTV. And the resources that our participants have at their disposal include, this year we rolled out a chroma key wall. In the past, we have used 2 wall-mounted displays, like in the upper picture. They also have the experimental version of the enhanced data display and GR2 analysts to use for their own radar interrogation, NWS chat to communicate with the emergency managers and the person that acts as a weather service warning coordination meteorologist. We provide them a programming schedule that also goes down to at least when commercial breaks are, so they know whether or not they're cutting in on a television show or a commercial break, because that does factor into their decision making. They have wireless lapel mics, we have a camera, and then we also have protected Twitter and Facebook accounts so that they can actively post to social media during the cases. As we've held this project for the past 3 years, 6 main types of coverage have emerged through interactions with participants. Crawling messages, which we're all familiar with, short cut-ins, which are typically under 5 minutes, and that includes during commercial breaks and programming. Weathercast, which is the weather segment during the local news. Wall-to-wall or continuous coverage, social media posts, and often online streaming on a station website. Coverage decisions are already complex and depend on many factors that not a lot of us realize. In addition to hazard type, programming can play a huge role. There have been many times we've held this project during May sweeps. And so cutting in during May sweeps can be a really difficult decision. We've also found that different stations handle closed captioning differently, and that can impact station budgets. So breaking in or going wall to wall can mean having someone actively typing everything that they're saying as a closed captioning service, and they have to pay for that service. Market size and centers of population, and also station management. We found a lot of variability in whether or not the on-air broadcaster makes the decision whether or not to go on air or just stick with the crawl. As we give this probabilistic information to our participants, many of them struggle with how to communicate probability in a way that will make sense to their viewing audience. When they do struggle with that communication, they seek out additional information like the emergency managers from that forecaster discussion box, NWS chat, and radar analysis. It's also easy to get very overwhelmed because we're looking at severe wind and hail, tornado, and lightning, that they need to filter out some of these hazards, either by hazard type, whether or not it's been created from an algorithm versus touched by a forecaster, and then they'll also toy with setting probability percentage thresholds to curb the messy appearance of their displays. At the beginning of the week, we asked participants about what their probabilistic thresholds for different coverage decisions would be, and have found that those typically change throughout the week. And more often than not, they typically decrease throughout the week. But this just shows the different probability thresholds of participants for the different hazards as well as the different types of coverage. Tornado typically has a much lower threshold for making a coverage decision than something like wind or hail or lightning. And really lightning, that's something that they haven't really seen before other than current lightning strikes, and so they really are struggling with what to do with some kind of lightning product. And here's another coverage type by hazard. Across 2016 and 2017, the 2018 project is currently ongoing, so we haven't been able to put this information together yet. But in terms of severe wind and hail and lightning, the crawl is by far the most common coverage type. And then when you get to wind and hail and tornado, then that's when you start getting your cut-ins, particularly the short cut-in or taking over the weathercast. And then tornado is where you typically start getting that wall-to-wall coverage. Update frequency was something that really has proved problematic for the television industry. As Kim mentioned, the default for the updates is 2 minutes. Our participants in 2016 felt that the 2-minute updates were way too fast, and participants were overwhelmed. There were some really high-end severe weather events that when we were doing live weather events that year, and we only had one participant participating each week. But they also mentioned that in addition to their own personal preference, that 2-minute updates were way too fast for current station bandwidth and for those crawl systems, because most of those are automated. And that is one of the most used coverage types. So in 2017, we varied the update frequencies by day, easing them in starting at 20 minutes, which is the typical update frequency of a weather service warning. And then day 2 was 10 minutes, day 3, 5, and day 4 was 2 minutes. And participants felt that that 5 to 10 minute range was optimal for being able to explain what was going on to the viewers before it changed. And now in 2018, we're actually letting our participants choose their own update frequency. We've only had 1 week go by, but last week's participants were pretty steady at 2 minutes. So we'll have to see what the next 2 weeks of participants choose to do. In terms of the path forward, we're actively pursuing funding, because a lot of the end user work has sort of been piecemeal funding. So we're trying to secure some longer term funding. I don't know, Kim, if you want to jump in on.
Yeah, and I'll note, we didn't present to you guys the bevy of work that's also going on with respect to the public, because you may be wondering, you know, how do people in the public understand probabilistic information? That's just as important, and there have been some projects that have started to look at that question. So while there are concerns from the communicators, the broadcasters, and the emergency managers, they always ask us, do you know? What should we be giving people? And so we're starting to do some of that work too. But like Cody said, we need more funding to make sure that our samples are generalizable, that we're able to do monitoring and evaluation when a system like this is implemented. We're looking to communicate and work more closely with the hurricane world. And they sort of have this great natural experiment going on with a set of layered probabilistic products that all sort of tell slightly different stories about potential futures for a hazard like a hurricane. And, you know, is that something that as a collection makes sense to people? Because we're putting out, you know, we might be putting out here a collection of hazard information. And there are a lot of ways we could do it. So we're, you know, the path forward, we're still trying to figure out even the right questions to ask and the right ways to explore those questions. So one of the things that we have done, I think it's relevant to talk to all of you about this, is we've brought in external academics, from communication scholars to psychology scholars and human factors researchers. And they're all weighing in and giving us their insights about, you know, how they would ask questions about what this all means and what they would do. And I think as the door's open, if you have an interest in this and would like to reach out, we would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your perspective. If you've done work that's related, have some insights for us, please feel free. And with that, I think
I will very quickly throw on my executive officer of hazardous weather testbed hat and mention that next spring there will be an announcement asking people to apply for travel funds to come visit the hazardous weather testbed, to choose an experiment to observe, and just really to kind of get a feel for what it is, because it's very difficult to explain to someone who hasn't witnessed it with their own eyes. So that'll be coming out probably in February.
Yeah. And with that, I think we'll hand it back over to you, Elizabeth.
Thank you, guys. Thanks so much. That was great. I neglected to say at the beginning of this that we will do presentations questions after both presentations. So we're going to have Jill Gamble present next. Give us a second to change over the presenters. And what we can do is, if you have a question, go ahead and put it in the question section or chat section that you have in the GoToWebinar, and I will do them in the order we receive them. If there's some reason that we don't get to yours before we run out of time, I will make sure that I send it to the presenters so that we can get the questions answered. So thank you, guys. And with that, Jill, I'm going to change presenter and give it to you. So give me a second.
Okay. All right. Okay. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Take it away. And if you could just give a quick introduction for everyone, I'd appreciate it.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Jill Gamble. I'm down in Athens, Georgia. I am the Coastal Resilience Specialist for the University of Georgia Marine Extension and Georgia Sea Grant. And in case you are not familiar with Sea Grant, I wanted to just introduce the network. We comprise 33 programs located in every coastal and Great Lakes state, as well as several U.S. territories. Sea Grant is administered by NOAA, and we provide research, education, and outreach on a myriad of coastal issues, from fisheries to water quality to sustainable development. And these are the locations where we are. So in my job as an extension agent, I help coastal communities prepare for and respond to coastal hazards. I'm the co-author of the first sea level rise plan implemented in the state of Georgia, which was unanimously adopted by Tybee Island, which is a small barrier island located just outside of Savannah, in April 2016. I'm also the lead author of the state's second flood resiliency plan, which was adopted unanimously by St. Mary's City Council in May 2017. And so today I'm going to go through an overview of some storm surge risks in the Southeast, provide some background on recent research related to hurricanes Matthew and Irma, and then share some examples of virtual reality programs and the potential of VR to motivate climate adaptation and increase public safety. And so there'll be some cool videos for y'all to check out. Okay, so the southeastern United States sustains more billion-dollar weather and climate disasters than any other region in the country. This risk is increasing as the region experiences urbanization that puts more people and community assets in harm's way. This exposure is further compounded by the Southeast facing an increase in intensive rainfall events, severe heat waves, decreased water availability, and accelerated rate of sea level rise. Many cities and counties in the Southeast are also encumbered with social disparities that can impair their resilience to climate hazards. The South contains 84% of all U.S. counties that experience persistent poverty, and that is poverty rate of at least 20% over the past 30 years. Climate change is projected to increase this existing inequality as the South faces disproportionate economic losses, as I shared before, due to its greater exposure to climate and severe weather impacts. By 2100, up to 13.1 million people in the U.S. are projected to be at risk of inundation due to sea level rise. Of this, almost 53% are located in the southeastern states of North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida. And that's based on research out of the University of Georgia by Matt Hauer. NOAA has very high confidence that sea levels will continue to rise or even accelerate, increasing the frequency, magnitude, and duration of this coastal flooding. And this is a graphic that a graphic designer made here at UGA. So combined with sea level rise, severe weather events over the past 2 years have created record and near record water levels at many NOAA tide gauges along the Atlantic coast. Here in Georgia, we have a NOAA tide gauge at Fort Pulaski National Monument in Savannah, Georgia, and it has measured 10 inches of sea level rise over the past 83 years. 3 of the top 5 water levels have been measured in the past 3 years. And I'm going to share those events now. So this is a king tide, which is a naturally occurring astronomical event that occurs due to the positioning of the sun, the moon, and the earth. This was not caused by rain or storm event. This is what's known as sunny day flooding. This particular king tide occurred in October 2015. And what you see in the slide is Highway US 80, which is the road that connects Tybee Island to the mainland. It's the one road that provides access to the island. And with sea level rise, this road is flooding more and more frequently throughout the year. In October 2016, Hurricane Matthew swept along the U.S. southeastern seaboard, causing over $10 billion in damage. This is St. Mary's, Georgia. So it's important to know, for those of you who haven't been to Georgia before, we have a tidal range of 6 to 8 feet twice daily. So the difference between high tide and low tide is between 6 to 8 feet, and we make that change twice per day. we have 2 high tides per day. So even though along the Georgia coast, the hurricane did not pass at high tide, it still produced storm surge, Hurricane Matthew, that was 1 feet higher than any water level on record for the Savannah area. And again, that tidal record goes back to 1935. Less than 1 year later, Hurricane Irma threatened Georgia again, leaving more than 16 million people in the southeast without power. Even though the eye of Irma ended up passing hundreds of miles away, Savannah still received over 5.6 feet of storm surge, which on top of our tide created peak water level less than 4 inches below the record-setting flooding of Hurricane Matthew. For those of you who have been to Savannah, this is River Street, sort of the tourist area. This graphic is by Hal Needham, and it's showing that despite its western trajectory, some of Irma's most severe impacts affecting the U.S. mainland were experienced along the South Atlantic coast. The NOAA tide gauge at Fernandina Beach, for example, just north of Jacksonville, Florida, recorded almost 8 feet of storm surge. So following Hurricane Matthew, I began collaborating with colleagues at the National Center for Atmospheric Research and the University of Georgia on NSF and Georgia Sea Grant funded research, studying the experiences, risk perceptions, and decision-making of coastal residents in relation to hurricanes and storm surge. We interviewed over 60 people in 2 counties, surveyed 1,000 people throughout coastal Georgia, and conducted 7 focus groups in Beaufort, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia, and Brunswick, Georgia. In the focus groups, we wanted to engage residents with varying degrees of exposure and adaptive capacity, including those who are often labeled socially vulnerable, to better understand their experiences and perceptions. To do so, we partnered with Clemson Cooperative Extension, the Harambe House, which is an environmental justice organization in Savannah, and the Magnolia Park and College Park Planning Assembly, which is a neighborhood-based advocacy group. Following Hurricane Irma, I collaborated again with researchers at NCAR and the University of Georgia to study how perceptions might have changed after experiencing 2 hurricanes in less than 1 year. We invited the same participants from the Hurricane Matthew interviews and focus groups to come back, and we actually had so many people wanting to return and talk that we had to turn people away. The focus groups entailed showing participants prototype storm surge visualizations developed by NCAR in order to understand communication challenges, forecast comprehension, and test strategies for messaging and mapping storm surge risks. These maps use different spatial scales, as you can see from the top illustrations, and varying levels of complexity in the information that was portrayed. We also tested different ways of communicating probabilities, as indicated by Kim and Cody. So this is one of the graphics that we tested in the focus groups. This 3D GIS animation was developed by NCAR, and it shows how quickly 9 feet of storm surge can inundate a barrier island community. Notice the timing in the bottom left corner of the screen. Those are mere minutes ticking by. So you see right now it's at 12. Okay, now we're going down to a different view. You can see we're at 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes. And obviously, participants really responded to this graphic as far as much more strongly than we would do a map to understand their risk in relation to storm surge. So I wanted to, we're still assessing this data, but I wanted to just share 4 points of interest from the focus groups. This is a graphic that we put together following the focus groups when Hurricane Irma was approaching the southeast United States. We quickly created materials to address key knowledge gaps that were then recirculated by the National Weather Service and utilized by local governments throughout the southeast and featured in numerous media articles and blogs. So we made videos and social media posts. This is one that just is kind of a summary of all the different key messages. So one of the points is that in much of the southeast, because we have these huge tidal ranges, there are a variety of terms for the public to wade through in relation to high tide, low tide, mean higher high water, mean lower low water, mean sea level. Most of the people who lived on barrier islands knew the elevation of their house, but in relation to mean sea level. This resulted sometimes in people unknowingly talking in reference to different datum in the focus groups, or misinterpreting information on a map that maybe referenced ground level, for example, because they were using a different base as their starting point. Oops. And then I wanted to also highlight that compounded flooding and how that interacts with people understanding their risks. So for example, you can have heavy rainfall overwhelming a stormwater system, while the high water levels in the sea hindered the drainage of these stormwater systems. And so even if you're outside the floodplain, you can still be vulnerable. And FEMA estimates that 25% of flood losses occur in these low-risk flood zones. Third, the perception that the elevation of your home dictates your safety. That was something we heard quite a lot. So even if you're on high ground, not acknowledging that emergency services may not be able to reach you, you may not have power or be able to flush your toilet, and your escape routes may be underwater. And then finally, we identified some of the key reasons people did not evacuate during these hurricanes, and that included waiting until it was too late to safely leave, and also being responsible for pets and dependent family members. So we have much more of the results that we can share afterwards if you're interested. And these are some of the storm surge messaging that we released leading up to Hurricane Irma. Our messaging on social media reached over 126,000 people over just a few days, hopefully keeping coastal residents safe from drowning and flood risk. So now I'm going to shift over to virtual reality. And what we're doing with VR is trying to experiment with different ways of communicating storm surge risk to see how that affects action. The implementation of recommended actions. So research indicates that even when people are knowledgeable about environmental risk, they may not internalize those risks as personally applicable. Even with the recent experiences from Hurricane Matthew and Irma, barriers exist to providing direct experiences of these risks to community members and decision makers, often because mandatory evacuation orders may be in place, sparing them from directly experiencing the height of the extreme weather events. And it's also, when you're talking about sea level rise, difficult to provide direct firsthand experience of future risk. Virtual reality, or VR, as I'll refer to it from here on out, can simulate these direct experiences for coastal residents without exposing them to the personal harm of a real-world extreme weather event. So with VR, as you can see in this picture, you have a headset, you are immersed in a world. It works just as if you were looking around the room where you're sitting right now. As you have the headset on, you can look around in a 360. Some VR programs use handheld devices so that you can interact with the world, the virtual world that you're in. And so with that, you can see, hear, and even feel the results of environmental damage as if the event were happening at that moment. It's a very visceral, immersive experience. And studies that my colleagues here at the University of Georgia have undertaken suggest that how individuals receive information, like the message channel, may be just as important as the information they receive, such as the message content, in motivating individuals to engage in behavior change, over and beyond mere intention to change behavior. So we've also found that the research has found that these embodied experiences in virtual worlds transfer into the physical world. So if you are taking an action in a virtual world, it can continue to influence decisions made in the physical world, influencing attitudes and behaviors for days and weeks after someone has completed their virtual experience. So this is an example of a VR program that the city of San Francisco is using. It has a split screen just because we're obviously not using the headsets, but you can imagine if you had, them one per each eye coming, and it would create a 360 view around you. What it's showing is for a current location in the city, a real life location. Let me start it again so you can see. Then it's showing what it will look like with sea level rise. And then it's showing what it could look like with climate adaptation measures taken. So this is with the climate adaptation. Here's the current. Here's with sea level rise. And here's with climate adaptation measures. And again, current, sea level rise, and climate adaptation measures. This is another program. This is developed by FEMA. It's called IMMERSED, and it's going to take you through the experience where you are a local leader in a flood emergency. FEMA has big plans to build out on this program, introducing new chapters and experiences in it. And right now they're using fairly expensive technology so that it sort of limits the how widespread they can use it. But in their next iteration, they're planning to transfer it to Google Cardboard to make it so that it can be used much more broadly. And so in the FEMA program, you also are able to see with climate adaptation measures taken, how that might help the flooding. So you can see the solutions popping up everywhere. That's if you elevate the home, if you have culverts and wetlands, how then the destruction is much less. This is a very early prototype of a demo that we're creating here at the University of Georgia, and we will be testing it in focus groups later this summer. So how we're trying to build upon these previous efforts is to make it more interactive, because the research has found that having that interaction, having that decision making within the VR program actually is what helps it transfer into the real world and influence your decision making in the real world. So in this program, and please forgive that it's very rudimentary, the graphics right now, but you design your own home, get to customize it, decorate it to create a sense of place. And then you go and you are then introduced into a hurricane situation, and you have to make decisions about what to do. We haven't built out the actual flooding coming in yet, but that will be part of the experience. And you'll be making decisions about whether to evacuate or not. And you'll be able to kind of play out different scenarios to see how your safety is impacted. And then finally, I am very excited to mention a brand new effort down here in Georgia called the Georgia Climate Project. This is a collaboration between Emory University, the University of Georgia, and Georgia Tech. We just published a paper a few weeks ago in Environmental Management where we identified the top 40 climate research questions for the state of Georgia. We brought together experts from different sectors, from coastal, agricultural, energy, trying to think of urban, health, and we all sat down. We had a survey initially to help kind of narrow down the scope of potential questions, and then we met for 2 days to hammer out the top 40 questions that policymakers in Georgia might need answered from a research standpoint in order to make decisions about climate challenges in our state. And one future, if you can see this, track that we're going to be doing is called the Georgia Climate Stories, where we will be creating virtual reality videos. So you can see this is a prototype page. It's not live yet. I'm just showing it to you just for fun. But this is eventually what the website will look like, and you'll be able to hop around the state and see different stories in Georgia, from Atlanta to the coast to other regions, and learn about different solutions that communities are taking in addressing climate challenges. And we have borrowed from Google a 360 video camera. So this is, in the earlier VR programs that I showed you, they were animations. This is actually video. And this is from YouTube, and I'm actually moving it around. I filmed myself moving it around. You could use a headset, VR headset, to see this, or you could just on YouTube use the little remote control here and kind of move it around and manipulate it. And we're going to be going down to Tybee Island and filming that road that I showed you earlier during a king tide, so that people can experience what that is like during one of those events. And then we've already gotten some narration from the mayor of Savannah, and we'll be interviewing other people to help explain what you're seeing as you're in this virtual world. And thank you so much. If anyone has questions, here's my contact information. And thank you for allowing me to speak with you all.
Jill, thank you so much. That was great. At this point, we have a little over 10 minutes left. We've already gotten some questions. So I'm going to start with a few for Kim and Cody, and then we also have some for Jill. So first, and what I'm going to do is I'll ask the question and mangle your last name when I say who's asking the question, and then I'll mute you while the presenter's responding. I'll unmute you so that you can then ask a follow-up question. But we do only have about 10 minutes, so please be mindful. All right, so the first is from Matt Kelsch. And the question says, you showed a lot of hazards related to convection, but not flash floods. Will that be coming, and how will it interface with Flash, which I assume is a product because it's in all caps? So that's for Kim and Cody.
So the flash flooding project is separate from the severe convective hazards. They have not yet incorporated end users into their testbed experiments, but I think they're relatively close within the next few years. And that is all based off of Flash.
Great. So Matt, I have unmuted you. Do you have any follow-up, or did that answer your question? And apparently I didn't unmute you successfully. So if you have any more questions, please go ahead and chat them to us. And the next question, let me see, is also for Kim and Cody. It's from John Wiener. The question is, many local radio and perhaps increasing number of TV stations are not human operated. How do you cope with that? On the other side, in New Orleans, the local station that stayed on air with known personalities was a great help and trusted source in response and recovery after Katrina. But far more commonly, there is no one at the station. How do you handle that? Does anyone override authority? Should there be such authority? Do you guys have any response for that?
I guess we haven't come across, at least in terms of severe convective weather, any participants where their station has ever been abandoned, I guess would be the word. I mean, from local experience in Oklahoma City, even the times when stations have been in the direct path, there has always been that one brave Met that stayed on the air. So we have, in terms of severe convective weather, we have not run into that, but that would be really interesting.
Yeah, it is a really interesting point. Yeah, certainly not something that we've run into for our set of hazards. I guess that's something that every station would have to decide how they would run with something like that.
So we have Gina here, and she is going to also take a stab at addressing that. And John, just so you know, I have unmuted you. Hopefully that you will be able to talk.
Yeah, in severe, I completely agree with Cody and Kim that I also have not experienced that. In tropical, you know, if a station, radio or TV, needs to be evacuated, for example, there's often a sister station that will take over, and I believe that did happen with KHOU in Houston during Harvey, for example. I think a sister station in Dallas or a local city actually took over and provided, they give them their airwaves and they were able to use that. Radio station similarly. With some smaller markets, there are private sector companies that the broadcaster is not actually in that location, but they are actually broadcasting from wherever the headquarters of that company is. So I think a lot of these media sources actually have backups for these environments.
So, John, I've unmuted you. Can you actually talk, or am I just really being unsuccessful in unmuting? All right. So I guess I won't try to unmute people because that's not working. But, John, if you have follow-up questions, please go ahead and send a chat, and we can see if we can answer it. The next one is from Joy, who has left, but I'll go ahead and ask it. This is also for Cody and Kim. Want to know if there are test beds for wildfires too, if you guys know about that.
There is not a wildfire test bed. I'm trying to think if there is a test bed that would fall under. I'm not entirely sure because the Storm Prediction Center does have fire weather responsibilities, so it is possible that that would fall under the hazardous weather test bed. We've just not had any projects related to fire weather.
And the interesting thing about wildfires is also interagency and how it's handled. So there are other departments of the government that have responsibility there, and they may have test beds we just don't know about. They just may not be in the NOAA network.
Thanks. And so what I will do, because Joy had to leave, so I will ask if you guys, if I forward her question to you, Kim and Cody, if you could just respond. What you just said, I think, is great. So the next question I have is for Jill. This is also from John, who pointed out that he doesn't have a microphone. That's why unmuting him didn't do anything. So thank you for letting me know that, John. So Jill, she says, great work. Could you please cite the source for the FEMA information on the 25% of losses due to compounded flooding events in the low-risk areas as mapped? There's a lot of concern now for the aged and misunderstood flood insurance rate maps, still treated as authoritative in a lot of land use. I don't know if you have that information handy. If not, we can give you John's email address to send it. But if you have any comments on that, please have at it.
Yes, I can look it up. It's on FEMA's website, and I'd be happy to send it to you, John. And you're absolutely right. Here in Georgia, we're seeing that areas, and especially on our barrier islands, are coming out of the floodplain on the latest firm maps, which is causing confusion, especially after having these big flood events over the past few years. And so I think that that is a big challenge, a key challenge in trying to help people understand that even if they're not in the floodplain according to, or they're not in the floodplain where they're needing to buy flood insurance, they're mandated, they still need to be concerned about their flood risk.
Excellent, thank you. And then, let's see, we have another question for Jill from Jeff Smith, who is with NOAA in Boulder, or has done work for NOAA in Boulder. It says, nice talks. I was especially interested in the virtual reality talk that Jill did, since he's created a tornado VR experience for NOAA. And have you also experienced some resistance to VR from management? I don't know who management is. Big M, little m, I'm not sure.
Well, so far here, VR is new enough that people are really intrigued to try it. We haven't gotten pushback. I think that where there's challenges and limitations is maybe just in the technology at this point. You know, trying to balance the immersive aspect, the interactive aspect with the price tag, so that you can have it as widespread and, you know, you can have big groups experience it. And so that sort of, you know, do you give up quality a little bit and perhaps some of the visceral response to it and able to kind of democratize it. So I think it'll be really interesting where technology goes. And I'm sure you can relate to that with your VR program.
Great. And then another question from John. This would like discussion of whether local radio should have emergency access plans that emergency management can use for broadcast. I'm guessing that's, well, actually for anyone. So Kim, Cody, Jill, comments on that?
We were actually just looking up the tornado virtual reality experience. Trying to find that. Would love a link actually if someone has that. We were talking about how great we to have that.
I have Jeff's email address. I will send it to you, Kim, so Jeff can share that with us because you're not the only one interested.
Okay. Okay, thank you. I'm so sorry. Could you please repeat the question?
Sure. The question, well, it was more of a, can we have a discussion about whether local radio should have emergency access plans that emergency management can use for broadcast? So I don't know that we have a response for that, John.
The closest I can give to a response is that I can't tell you exactly who is working on the next FCC, what is it? It's the next broadcast, digital broadcast. I can't think of the right word. I mean, it's AWARN, but it's the next digital broadcast standard. Like when we went from analog to digital, it was an FCC mandate, but there is a current digital to ATSC 3.0 that is not FCC mandated, but they are working on incorporating all of these really neat weather capabilities down to if your television is ATSC 3.0 compatible, it would turn on in the middle of the night if you were under a tornado warning. So it's supposed to, because of the way it works, which I don't know the nitty-gritty details, I just have a PowerPoint that explains it. It is supposed to allow first responders to essentially give themselves priority for communicating during times of emergency. And I probably totally botched that, but there's an acronym called AWARN, and it has to do with ATSC 3.0. That's the best answer I can give.
That's great. And I got a comment from Karen Bareford, who is the NOAA Sea Grant Liaison at the National Water Center for the National Water Extension Program. And she said that that information should be part of their public information plan. So with that, we are out of time. Thank you guys so much. If you have any other questions, you all have my email address from the invitations. See, I have just chatted to everyone the tornado experience link that I got from several people. So thank you all very much for sharing that. We will send that out via email as well, so you guys can see it, anybody who's interested. And we have recorded this webinar, and we'll make it available. We'll send out a link. It will be on NOAA's Climate Program Office page, and we'll share that too. And again, thank you. We will probably have another one of these in about 6 months. If you have any suggestions of people you'd like to hear about their social science research from NOAA-funded sources, we would love to know, and happy to share the work that you guys are doing. So thank you very much. Thanks to our speakers. Thanks to our OAR Social Science Network. And have a great day.